Chapter 2 Storytelling. "Mom?" Sora asked with a quiver in his voice. "Sora, is that you?" his mother asked with new tears suddenly forming in her eyes, all previous aggression forgotten. "Is that you?" For the first time that day, Sora finally let the tears fall. "Yes, Mom, it's me," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm home." Sora's mother was overcome by a wave of emotions as she let her own pearly tears fall. They both rushed at each other and cried in each other's arms, so happy they were to be reunited again. "Oh, Sora," his mother stated in a quiet voice, "my baby's home. I missed you so much." Sora sniffed. "I missed you too, Mom," he managed to say through his dry throat. His mother tensed unexpectedly as she let him go, and the previous happiness she had radiated was suddenly gone. Replaced by a wave of motherly anger and worry, she fixed her son with a stern glare. Sora quailed in her sight before she let loose the storm of questions he knew she would ask. Suddenly he felt that he would rather face Sephiroth and Xemnas combined, 1-on-2, rather than face his mother. "You're on your own, man," chuckled the voice in the back of his head. "Shut up, Roxas." "Where have you been?" his mother let loose. Where are you? "What have you been doing? Who are these animals?" she politely screamed at them. Sora and Kairi sighed while Donald let out a whack of indignation of being referred to simply as an animal. Glad though he was about being home, he was too tired to tell stories tonight. There will be plenty of time tomorrow, he thought. Besides, Kairi probably needs to get home. Her dad will have a fit too. Sora took a deep breath. "I'm too tired right now, Mom. Can we do all this in the morning? Kairi kind of needs to get home too, you know." He turned his head and gave Kairi a small smile while yawning the whole way for effect. Kairi smiled too, but her hands on her hips, and looked back at him with a look that plainly said, "You're just using me so you don't have to face your mother." "Oh, good evening, Kairi. I didn't even see you there." Sora's mother turned to her and gave a brief smile. Kairi nervously returned it with a small wave of her hand. "Hello, Sora's mom," she said anxiously. "Please, Kairi, call me Anne," she said while shaking her head. "Anyway, before you go to bed, Sora, and before you leave, Kairi, could you tell me who these, people are?" Well, I owe my mom this much now, Sora thought. He was about to begin when Donald rudely interrupted him. "Well," he began, still miffed being called an animal, "I'm Donald Duck, Royal Court Magician to King Mickey. This is Goofy, Captain of the King's Royal Knights. And this is Jiminy Cricket, appointed Royal Chronicler, who traveled with us." Goofy gave a wave while Jiminy hopped into Anne's outstretched hand and lifted his top hat. Anne giggled and shook his tiny hand. "Nice to meet you all. Sorry about the frying pan, Goofy," Anne said apologetically to Goofy. "Yuck. Don't worry, Anne. I get bumped on the head all the time," Goofy said. "Hey, I wonder where the King and Riku have gone." Sora's eyes grew wide. "Huh?" Sora thought as he looked around. True to Goofy's word, there was no Riku or King Mickey anywhere. He simply shrugged. "They're probably at Riku's." "Well, I'm tired. Goofy, you escort Kairi home. I'm pretty sure her dad will jump down her throat for being home so late without a good excuse," Sora ordered. His mother was a little surprised at the changes that had taken place in her son. He was more thoughtful, forceful, caring, and much more. He was also taller and stouter, with more muscle on his scrawny arms than before. She wondered if he would fit into any of his old clothes. "Sure thing, Sora. Come on, Kairi," Goofy called. "All right, Goofy. Night, Sora," Kairi said as she left. Sora smiled and struggled to stifle a yawn. "Good night, Kairi," he said softly as the lightest pink crept onto his cheeks. As Sora watched her go and lost the sense of her perfume to the night, he was suddenly wishing that she would never leave. What was that about, he thought, as he turned upstairs, entered his room, changed into his now snug pajamas, and instantly fell asleep. His mother watched him go with the slightest smirk on her face. "They're going to figure it out sooner or later," she thought. Her attention was then redirected to the two figures still in the room that were looking around for some place they could sleep. Donald, right? There's a sofa in the living room that would suit you just nicely, I think. I'll bring down some blankets and a couple more pillows, if you like. She asked this nervously, not knowing how the duck, who she now knew was a magician, would react. Donald, however, acted as if she just offered him a four-poster bed fit for the king. He bowed low and praised her. "Thank you, Sora's mother." Without further ado, he rushed off to the couch in the living room, plopped down on it, and instantly fell asleep, snuggled against the pillow, and laughed nervously before turning to Jiminy. "Oh, don't worry about me, Anne," he said with a giant smile on his face. "I'll sleep on a pillow. Good night." He quickly bounded away, grabbed a pillow from the couch, lied down, and closed his eyes. My son sure has weird friends," she thought, as she too headed upstairs for some shut-eye. And tomorrow's going to be a long day. Sora woke the next morning at a time he normally wouldn't have even considered for the summer. Leaping up from his bed in a great bound, he majestically and heroically charged downstairs, slid in his sock feet across the hardwood maple floor of their kitchen, placed his two hands on the back of his chair, swung one leg across, and promptly plopped into it with a thump before he even registered what was around him. Donald was sitting at the table, a pancake in his bill, with only a couple left on his plate. His mother was in her chair drinking a cup of coffee, and Jiminy was eating a piece of toast. Sora smiled as he looked down at his plate. 3 slices of bacon, 2 moderately sized pancakes with whipped cream on top, 2 scrambled eggs. He swiftly devoured his breakfast. A sudden ravenous anger engulfed him. As Sora drained his glass of orange juice, his mother addressed him for the first time this morning. "If I had known you were this hungry, I would have Sorry about that. If I had known that you were this hungry, I would have made another pancake and saved it from Donald." She chuckled, shaking her head. Then her voice changed to a tone more appropriate for an interrogation. "Now, I was excited you were home. I woke up early and washed your clothes so you won't have to stay in your pajamas while you and your friends explain where you were to all of us." Sora gulped as he saw the small smile she wore slip away while saying each word. He knew that this would come, but he still wouldn't like explaining everything to his mother. Yet he had a curious expression on his face. What did she mean by all of us? She saw his face and answered his unspoken question. "By all of us, I mean me, Carrie's father, and Riku's parents." Sora's face paled as he began thinking of what Carrie's dad might do to him when they told him about the special connection he and Carrie shared. "It's all in your head," Roxas said in his mind. "He'll be happy for the two of you." Sora was too distraught of every evil thing that could happen to even pay attention to Roxas. Anne, though, was oblivious to her son's internal conflict or the alter ego that inhabited him, simply because she had no knowledge of anything that had previously happened. Donald and Jiminy didn't pay the slightest attention to either of them, still consuming their breakfast. "You'd better go upstairs and change," she said with a brisk tone in her voice. "Carrie, Riku, Goofy, and someone else called the King will be arriving in 10 minutes. Sora slowly rose from his chair and gloomily marched upstairs to change. Before he got out of earshot of the kitchen, however, he heard Donald praise his mother's cooking and ask what they were doing next. He entered his messy bedroom and saw his black outfit that he wore neatly folded on his chair. As he changed into the familiar Sora we all knew and loved, he started to change his outlook on the whole Carrie's father situation. Maybe, he thought, maybe he will be so engrossed in the story and so intrigued by the other worlds that he won't harass Kyrie and me. That's the attitude I want to hear, Roxas comfortingly said in his mind. Sora smirked as nobody's remark. Thanks, Roxas. 5 minutes later, Sora calmly walked down the stairs, ready to face the angry parents the universe could throw at him. Then, just as he was about to step into the living room, with his mother already on the couch, dressed in a red t-shirt and tan pair of shorts, the doorbell rang. All sense of self-confidence vanished from Sora. I'll get it, he dully declared as he heavily stepped towards the door. He took a long look at it before he opened the wooden door behind the screen. It was mahogany, intricately carved with a beach, ocean, and palm trees in the center, with a brass doorknob on the left side. Sora sighed as he pulled open the door. He could smell her perfume before he even saw her, vanilla with honey and strawberries. It was the most wonderful thing he had ever encountered in the morning before. There stood Kairi with her father. He looked gruffer than Sora had previously remembered, with a protruding chin, black stubble, and huge blonde bangs. He was frowning and staring at Sora, as if he were a measly little annoying bug. Sora could dimly see Kairi giving him a weak smile, but her eyes were filled with fear and frozen instead on Kairi's father. "Well, out with it, boy," he demanded. "Where were you and my daughter? She won't tell me anything, and neither will this oversized dog." Sora just noticed that Kairi's smile had vanished. She too was looking at her father with fear. Sora felt too tongue-tied to answer, and instead screwed his face into what he hoped was an apologetic one, and opened the screen door for them. In marched Kairi's father, a look of resentment in his eyes, and Sora quailed before them. Before he could do anything to Sora, Anne called to him from the living room. "In here, Seymour. They'll explain everything." "Strange. You will face down Hades, the Lord of the Dead, with no fear, yet you cower before your best friend's father?" "Be quiet, Roxas. This is hard enough as it is." Sora feebly answered back in his mind. His anxiety kept him from focusing, as he had enough consciousness around him to register that Kairi stayed in the hall with him, as Goofy, Riku, the King, and Riku's parents. Strange, I didn't know they were there too. All walked past him to find seats in the living room. Harry placed an arm around his shoulders, and he felt a blush creep onto his cheeks as warmth and feeling returned to his body. He inhaled a deep breath and looked her in the eyes, taking strength and comfort from her perfume and presence. Her cerulean eyes radiated comfort and strength, and he could see a blush on her cheeks too. "Come on," she said quietly, hanging on to her every word. "We can get through this." Kairi removed her arm from him and turned towards the living room. Sora followed her, but before they entered, he quietly muttered, "Thanks, Kairi." She stifled a small giggle as they entered the living room. Sora's living room was a perfect square, a little back from the center towards the kitchen. It had a cream-colored couch, half facing the large window that displayed Anne's flower gardens, and half facing the TV. There was also a small black coffee table in front of the couch, a standing lamp behind an armchair in one corner, and several beanbags of different colors in front of the TV. On the couch sat Anne, Seymour, and Riku's parents. His father looked a little older version than Riku, except with brown hair, while his mother was the person who Riku got his hair color from. Her silver bangs wafting down from the sides of her face, still not showing many telltale signs of middle age through her green, pointedly looking at Sora and Kairi, barely concealing a grin. Jiminy Cricket was on the floor in front of the beanbags, with his journal in front of him. It was separated into several different volumes. Volume 1 was brown and contained the chronicles of their adventure. Volume 2 was silver, and within it was a scrapbook, including the heartless nobodies and people they had met. Volume 3 was red and contained the secret Ansem reports. Volume 4, which was blue, contained all the remaining miscellaneous data, including the limits. King Mickey noticed their entrance and signaled them to sit in the two remaining beanbags. Sora sighed and shook his head as he and Kairi sat down. Now then, Mickey began, much to his parents' anxiety. "I believe we should start at the beginning, with Sora and Kairi and Riku here 2 summers ago, before this all started." Sora looked up and saw their parents nodding in agreement. Even Donald and Goofy looked at each other, as they had only heard the story once. King Mickey looked expectantly at the trio. "Well?" he asked. Riku sighed. It was clear that he should be the one to start. Well, he began, it all got into my head to well, he began, it all started when I got it into my head to build a raft. The three told them practically everything about what happened before Sora awoke in Traverse Town, about Sora's dream, the raft, Riku's desire to see other worlds, the door, mysterious man, everything except for Sora's drawing and Kairi joking about both her and Sora taking the raft together. At first, while Donald, Goofy, and Mickey were fascinated and listening attentively, the parents were only mildly interested, while Seymour glared at Sora with narrowed eyes. Their attention was captured when Sora began explaining about the mysterious man in the brown cloak, who coincidentally turned out to be Xehanort's Heartless. But they weren't about to tell their parents that yet. They pressed Sora, and he told them all he could remember, and Sora told them about when he came back to the island during the storm. The Heartless had appeared, and Riku opening his heart to the darkness. He told them of the island's destruction, the Keyblade's appearance, and fighting the dark side. It was here that the four parents in the room were completely enthralled by the story. As Sora, Donald, Goofy, and Jiminy gave them a retelling of their first journey, with many needed explanations on Heartless, and side comments from Riku and the King, until they finally got to the part with Ansem's defeat, the reformation of the island, and leaving Kairi behind so Sora and the others could resume their search for Riku and the King. By the end, Kairi and Anne were beaming at Sora with admiration and pride. Seymour simply huffed. So Sora and the last thing I remember before waking up, Sora stated foolishly, is a big round castle with copper roofs. I have no idea what it is, he said apologetically. He looked at Donald and Goofy. Neither of them seemed to know what the place was either. Riku, however, showed sudden interest. That's Castle Oblivion, he explained, looking directly at Sora. The organization was doing experiments on memory there. I had to fight my way through it while we were separated, though I wonder what you were doing there. He left his sentence hanging, half hoping Sora would finish it. Sora simply looked down and shook his head, being at a loss for words. Suddenly, a voice spoke from behind Kairi. I think I can answer that. Sora, Kairi, and Riku's heads whipped around a spectral image of Naminé, white dress and all, standing behind Kairi's beanbag. Kairi smiled. So you can come out of my head too? She then turned to look at Sora. Sora, does Roxas make comments in the back of your mind? Sora smiled and replied, yeah, can't get rid of them. Oh, thanks. Yes, Naminé replied the previous question before looking at Sora and nodded her head, and Roxas should be able to, too. Sora frowned. Can you, Roxas? Here goes nothing, came the reply from the now familiar voice inside his head. Slowly, Roxas faded in, also being a transparent figure. Standing next to Naminé, they looked at each other and grinned before they embraced, joyously expressing how great it was to be in the physical world. Sora cleared his throat, breaking up the two nobodies from their hug. So, he began with a small smirk on his face, what were you saying about knowing why we were in Castle Oblivion and what happened to us? Sora? King Mickey hesitantly asked. Sora half looked over his shoulder. Yes, Your Majesty, he said before the king could start. Donald interrupted. Who are you talking to? He quacked. The three teens and the nobodies realized that everyone else in the room had looks of anxiety, concern, and worry on their faces. While looking at the only teenagers in the room they could see. Sora and Kairi paled. Sora glanced at Roxas, who was pulling a face at Donald. Roxas, he began, desperately hoping that his nobody and him could still communicate soundly. When Roxas stopped, turned to face Sora, confirming his suspicions. He continued, Please tell me you and Naminé can make yourselves visible to everyone else too. Roxas was perplexed. He mulled it over for a few seconds and turned to Naminé. Well, can we? We won't know until we try. Sora was stunned. He started to sweat bullets. Can Naminé hear my thoughts too? She giggled, and seeing the standard confused look on his face. Yes, Sora. While we are out here, I can hear your thoughts, and Roxas can hear Kairi's. Roxas turned to her and they both nodded. The two nobodies closed their eyes and began to concentrate. Sora, Riku, and Kairi could notice nothing different. They could tell that it worked by the sudden looks of pure terror on their parents' faces. "There are ghosts in my house," Anne started shrieking. Riku's mother fainted. His father nearly threw up, while Kairi's father could barely ask one question the four of them were terrified of asking. Who are you?" He finally managed to squeak out. Naminé placed her hand over her heart. "My name is Naminé," she began. Roxas pumped his fist. "And I'm Roxas," he finished. They both bowed before their parents. Sora let out a sigh of relief and wiped his brow, glanced at Donald, Goofy, and Jiminy, and the King, none of them who were truly surprised. Time to figure this out, he thought. Roxas and Naminé turned to him. "So," he began again, "about Castle Oblivion, Naminé." She put her finger to her chin. "Oh yes, well, as Riku stated before, Castle Oblivion is where the organization was doing experiments on memory." Naminé explained about the White Rooms, Sora, Donald, and Goofy, and Jiminy losing their memories, Sora's memory manipulation, Organization 13's experiments with Sora, as well as Sora's confrontation with their members up until the eventual falling asleep, all while not explaining about what the organization was, much to the frustration of Seymour. "What is the organization?" he demanded angrily of Naminé. Roxas stepped in front of Naminé and held out his arms in a protective stance. Kairi's face held a little rage at her father's impatience. "Be quiet, Dad," she ordered. "We'll tell you about them soon." Sora was shocked and looked at Kairi with wonder, but then again, Naminé was half of her, and he would be angry if someone started harassing Roxas, unless he was doing the harassing. Seymour was quite taken aback at his daughter yelling at him. He was so shocked and angry, and 100 different emotions to discern between surprised and hostile, that he could only open and close his mouth like a goldfish, while his face flittered between the conflicting emotions, each striving for supremacy. "All I know is," Sora stated, before throwing his head up in vain and crying to the heavens, "I hate the organization even more now. I'm glad they're all gone," he stated that last bit so quietly only Kairi, Naminé, and Roxas could hear him. Roxas feigned hurt. "Hey, what am I, chopped liver?" he whispered to them, with mock tears in his eyes. They all chuckled and giggled, as the genre might be, taking no notice of the scene that had just passed. Riku's father had spoke up in Seymour's obvious incapacitation. "Well then, Kairi," he said in his deep, husky voice. Kairi and Riku turned to Sora, having come to realize that this was really Sora's story, and they would relate theirs as he told his tale. Given that they would make sense with background information, Sora looked at Donald, Goofy, and Jiminy. Jiminy smiled and nodded at him. "Well," Sora began, "we woke up from being asleep after about a year." So they began with waking up in Twilight Town and their first confrontation with the Nobodies, and a quick visit from the King before visiting Yen Sid, who explained to them about Nobodies. "So," Seymour began, as he was the most curious about the Nobodies and the organization, "Nobodies are, in essence, beings who have lost their hearts." "Yes," said the King. "Heartless isn't the correct term, as a heartless is simply the heart surrounded by the darkness that it yielded to. A nobody is the dark and soul of the entity left." Sora's mother's eyes began to water with tears. "So does that mean," she quietly cried out, "that my Sora became heartless, and nobody was created too?" Sora looked down, somewhat glumly, somewhat happy. After all, Roxas and Naminé were two new friends and additions to the party, right? "Yes," he stated, looking at his mother in the eyes, "and guess who they are?" Roxas and Naminé smiled and waved. "Wait," Sora uttered, clearly confused. "Hold up. Shouldn't only one nobody have been created when you became a heartless boy?" Well, that should have happened, Jiminy explained, but when Sora attacked himself with Riku's Keyblade of Captive Hearts, he didn't only release his heart, but Kairi's as well. In a way, Naminé and Roxas both used Sora's body to attain their own versions of their counterparts' bodies. As Kairi's a Princess of Hearts, she has no darkness in it, so cannot turn into a Heartless, which is why in our first journey she appeared so lifeless. Her body couldn't just disappear. Okay, that makes sense, Sora said while scratching his head. Kairi and the others laughed. Anyway, Sora continued, when we left Yensid's chamber and met Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, 3 good fairies, who made my new outfit with magic. We then went back to Master Yensid, learned that because we locked the Keyblade to darkness, the world had returned the barriers that previously kept them secret. But Yensid told us that the worlds had prepared new pathways, and that Sora's Keyblade could unlock them. We then took the gummy ship to Holler Bastion, where we then met up with Leon, Yuffie, Sid, and Merlin, Goofy continued. They told us that they had suddenly remembered us a while back, right before they made us Holler Bastion Restoration Committee honorary members. A yuck. It must have been when Naminé was bordering all of your memories, Sora. Donald shook his head. Ordering, you big palooka. He angrily quacked at Goofy. Goofy yucked again. Right, ordering. The tale proceeded on until their return to Twilight Town. When we arrived back at Twilight Town, Sora began downcast, Sora and his gang were under attack by nobodies. After we beat them, Saïx, he spat out the name as if it were poison. Organization 13's number 7 appeared as if he wanted to help us. He said that even though he didn't have a heart, he knew all too well how to injure one. He told us to be careful, or I might end up like Riku, Sora sighed, before a look of helplessness engulfed him. If only I'd killed him then. Kairi sympathetically gazed at Sora and placed a comforting arm on his shoulders, while Riku seemed lost in his own thoughts. Donald and Goofy and Mickey simply looked sadly at Sora. I didn't like Elfie much, Roxas huffed. This apparently sudden noise caused Sora to look up, smile at Kairi, and turn his head with her to look at Roxas, while she released him before a blush could noticeable foothold on the plane of her cheeks. Naminé raised an eyebrow and gave Roxas an inquiring look. Elfie, she asked with her hands on her hips. Well, he had pointy ears, Roxas protested, waving his hands in front of him. Everyone laughed. What's happening to me? Sora quietly asked himself. Roxas and Naminé glanced at each other with small smirks etched on their faces. Anyway, after that, Jiminy continued, Cypher told us to leave and gave us his trophy to say that we were the strong. Wait, Riku's mom cried. What did Saïx mean, end up like Riku? I'll tell you later, Mom, Riku said quickly before turning his attention back to Jiminy. Jiminy scratched his head. Sorry. Where was I? Oh, yes. Cypher gave us a trophy proclaiming is as the strongest guys in Twilight Town. As he and his crew left the Sandlot, Pence ran in and asked if we knew anyone by the name of Kairi. Kairi then uttered a small "oh" and had a look of understanding on her face. Then this is after Axel kidnapped me, she exclaimed. Sora leaned in interested. Before he could say anything, Seymour snapped out of his incapacitation. Who kidnapped my daughter? I am the mayor. I will have him hunted down and arrested, he proclaimed with a vengeance. What? Riku asked. You mean you didn't even know your own daughter went missing? Seymour glared at him, but also brought a hand thoughtfully to his chin. Mom probably did, she muttered to herself, looking down. She brought her head up and looked half-heartedly at her father, not knowing to tell him the truth or not. Before she could will herself to a decision, Sora spoke up. How did he do it, Kairi? He asked, his voice dripping with emotion. How did he take you? She looked into his eyes, getting strength from his voice, stronger and more caring than the voice she remembered from so long ago. "He didn't take me exactly," she began, speaking more to Sora than anyone else. "After school was out, I had sent my poem in the bottle. He appeared on the beach one day in a portal of darkness and offered to take me to you." She laughed a little. "As another portal appeared, Pluto ran out of it. Axel surrounded me with nobodies, thinking that a show of force would tempt me into coming with him. I ran into the other portal with Pluto, telling him that he wasn't acting very friendly. While Sora, Kairi, and the others sat in silence for a minute, Roxas was pondering Axel, his best friend's behavior. "That's it," he exclaimed, having reached his eureka moment. Axel might have really wanted to take you to Sora, Kairi, because he wanted to see me again. He wasn't acting very friendly, because with my absence he must have forgotten how to be friendly." Riku's father seemed puzzled. "But why would he want to see you, Roxas?" The transparent youth looked at him. "I was the member of Organization 13, he said. "Number 13, Roxas, the Key of Destiny. That was my name. Axel and I were best friends." Sora broke eye contact with Kairi and looked sympathetically at Roxas. "He told me that you made him feel like he had a heart." Roxas looked with wonder at Sora. "He said that?" Roxas asked, barely above a whisper. "I had no idea that someone would actually miss me." He left his sentence hanging as silence filled the air. Donald decided that they had deviated enough again. "Anyway," he began, drawing everyone's attention to him, "Pence told us to come to the station, where we found Hayner and Olette. They told us Kairi had come out of a portal of darkness in the wall, and Kairi was looking for Sora." Goofy yucked. "Olette said that Sora and Kairi's story was romantic," he said while covering his mouth. The two aforementioned teens blushed and quickly looked in the opposite directions to conceal their cherry-red faces. Roxas grinned. "That's Olette," he said before a somber expression claimed his visage. Naminé placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she apologized. Roxas looked at her and shook her head again. "No, don't apologize. You did what you had to," he simply stated. Again, the duck became frustrated that they had gone off track again. Before he could begin, Jiminy spoke up. Sora had become disheartened after they told us that Kairi was kidnapped by Axel. Before he could dwell on it, one of the crystals from Cypher's trophy began reacting, and we were back on our way to Hollow Bastion. Jiminy told them about finding Ansem's computer and about the first trip to Space Paranoids. Then all four of them suddenly burst into collective hysterics about seeing the king again, even if it was just for a minute. Mickey just sighed and shook his head as Riku laughed. Sora finished the first tale in Space Paranoids before King Mickey began to explain about how Ansem, who had already been defeated, was not really Ansem, but an imposter's Heartless, and that the imposter's nobody was the leader of Organization 13. Seymour looked confused, but didn't voice any questions yet. Anne and the others simply listened with acceptance. Sora and the others then explained that Maleficent had released an army of thousands of Heartless against Hollow Bastion, and while they were about to help their friends who were caught in the fray, Sora fought and defeated Demyx. "Waterboy?" asked Roxas. "He was funny," Sora nodded. "He was a kook," Sora simply said. Such a comment earned a few laughs. "Anyway, after that, Your Majesty, came up behind us and, instead of punishing us for not following orders, allowed us to fight and help our friends. Just then, an explosion sounded, and a boulder came off a cliff and is headed right for the king. Goofy pushed him out of the way and took the blow." Sora's eyes were shining with tears, some of sorrow, some of happiness. "We thought you were dead," he said, looking at Goofy. Goofy chuckled. "Gosh, I thought I told you guys that I get bumped on the head all the time." Everyone laughed. Sora wiped his eyes. "Anyway," he continued, "we left Goofy for dead and fought our way across the cliffs, and helped our friends to a fissure in the rock full of crystals, where I found another torn page. And Goofy then came up, caulking up to us. We then encountered the Great Maw, where the Heartless army stood as if frozen in time. The organization's leader appeared on the cliffs above, and the king realized who he was. Sora then turned to look at the king, who nodded. I realized I had met him before, Ansem the Wise, who had several apprentices when he was researching the darkness in people's hearts. One of them was a man by the name of Xehanort. He was Ansem's top apprentice when the organization's leader removed his hood. I knew then it was Xehanort's nobody. I rushed after him, and Sora, Donald, and Goofy were encircled by Heartless. Sora began to emit signs of severe depression and quickly stood up, wearily made his way out of the living room, up the stairs, and into his room. So everyone's eyes followed him, but Kairi's held the largest amount of concern. I'm going to see if he's okay, she said, and followed his path up to his room. Still in the living room, Seymour was about to have a fit. I won't stand it if that boy does anything to my daughter while they're up there, he exclaimed like a bull. Riku turned his head and calmly looked at him. Don't worry, he said. They're still figuring it out. Seymour's expression was still stony, but he looked up the stairs. Oh well, Donald sighed. We can finish the story without him. Sora sat on his bed with his back resting against the wall. He had his head in one hand. Why does that one memory still pain me? He asked himself. Am I just weak, or... He smelled her before he even saw her standing in the doorway. Vanilla, with honey and strawberries. He half smiled. Kairi. He thought he knew. The memory still pained him because the one person he cherished more than anything in the entire universe was completely denied to him after false hope. He had been placed in his heart. Sora could barely tell that she had come closer and sat down beside him. She placed a hand on his shoulder as she looked at him with pity. It must have been hard, she thought, having everyone he cared about always being taken away from him. She shook him slightly. Hey, she said in a sweet voice. Are you okay? Sora sighed as he released his answer. Yeah, he said. That one memory is just too painful right now. Kairi looked at him with wonder. After all he's been through, she realized, he still feels the pain. She gave him a comforting look. Well, she said, if you're not ready to tell about it, I won't press you for it. Sora didn't look up, but he still heard her. That was one of the reasons he liked her. She was so understanding and kind and caring. Sora drew strength from her presence. After what he could have an eternity, he finally looked up. Kairi, he said, smiling at her. Thank you. She smiled back, revealing her pearly whites. You're welcome, she said. So she began again, now that Sora was feeling better. Apart from that memory, would you be able to tell me the rest of the story? Sure. Sora told Kairi all that he remembered, including his thoughts, feelings this time. He left out a bit when he envisioned dancing with her in Halloween Town. But apart from that, things were kept to the truth. When he finally finished telling her about the battle with Xemnas and the door to light, he pulled a silver-colored book out of his jacket. Want to see pictures? He asked Kairi. His eyes lit up with excitement. Where did this come from? She interrogated Sora as she grabbed it from him. Sora grinned. I slipped it from Jiminy when he wasn't looking, he explained. He must be turning the house upside down looking for it. Sora laughed at his own statement. Kairi gave a small giggle as she turned to the page to see from the Pride Lands. Aw, she said. You make a cute line, Sora. He looked at the picture and blushed before looking at Kairi. I bet, he joked, that you make a cute lioness too, Kairi. She playfully slapped his arm, but they couldn't help having their eyes meet. Unnoticed at the door, Riku smirked before breaking them up, saying that supper was ready. As he walked back down the stairs to rejoin the group, he wondered, I wonder if I'll ever find someone like that. And that was Chapter 2, Storytelling. I'm Anime Guy Kurosaki 1. I will be back next time. If you'd like to appear on the show to be a voice for a character, find me at Anime Guy Kurosaki 1 on Skype, or message me on Twitter at AnimeGuy01. See you later. Bye.